thanks for being here, and the co-director James Reed is in the rainforest where internet connection is predictably not excellent, and so we had to cancel at the last minute. But we are delighted to have you, Pippa. Thank you so much. And I'll start with with the beginning. You are originally from South Africa, and you knew Craig Foster, and he had been filming already the octopus when you met him. You entered the project. Can you describe? Can you tell us the story?
Yeah. So I met Craig, I think in early 2015, and I was introduced to him by a mutual friend who was the co-founder of the Sea Change project. They formed the organization together. Anyway, my friend Ross was telling me he'd been going on these amazing dives, and they weren't wearing wetsuits, and he was just having these mind-blowing experiences. And I'd been diving in the kelp forest for already about 8 years at that point. But I went out on that first morning with Craig, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like putting on a pair of magical goggles. He has spent so much time getting to know the kelp forest environment and the kind of intertidal area on the shore that he's able to pick up signs and find animals that I didn't even know existed, even though I'd been diving there for a very long time at that point. And I just felt like I'd been let into this magical kingdom. And I was really fascinated by how he was able to read the natural world in that way. So about a year later, I went back to him and I said, will you teach me to track? And yeah, and he did. And the first thing I had to do was adapt my body to the cold. And the first animal I learned to track was an octopus. And about 6 months into that process, Craig said to me, look, I thought I was never going to make another film again, but I've had this incredible experience with the octopus. And he told me bits of that, but never the full story. At that point, she had already died, and he was kind of just getting over the grief of the experience. And he asked if I'd like to help him make a film. And it started off as this tiny little project with just the two of us in an edit suite in an attic and piles of hard drives. But yeah, as the project gained momentum, more and more filmmakers from all over the world got interested, and it became a fairly big project by the end.
For those of us that are not so knowledgeable of marine life, what is the difference between the kelp forest? What makes the kelp forest special compared to like the coral reef that we hear more about?
So kelp forests are temperate habitats. So they happen in places that are not tropical. Coral reefs are generally tropical habitats, and kelp forests are actually extremely widespread. 25% of our global coastlines are covered by kelp forests, which is something that very few people know. And they're very, very important ecosystems because they absorb carbon. They are extremely biodiverse, like thousands upon thousands upon thousands of species are found in kelp forests, and many of them are found only in kelp forests. And they're also very, very productive. All that matter being created all the time just creates a lot of food for all of the animals, and everything in that area is just very, very rich. They protect coastlines from storm surges, which is very important at the moment because of rising sea levels. And they're just these three-dimensional underwater wonderlands. You put your head in a kelp forest and it's like being in a jungle, except instead of having birds flying around you, you've got fish swimming past you in big flocks.
Yeah, there is a surplus of cinematic quality, I think, because of that sort of depth and mystery you get from the vegetation.
Yeah.
So how would you describe the footage that you added, you and Craig, brought to the film after the main filming of the octopus was done? What is it that you filmed further?
Well, by the time I got involved, there was this big pile of hard drives of footage that Craig had collected during, the time when the octopus was alive. Most of it was filmed by him. But at some point in the process, when he started to see these incredible things, like the octopus learning to hunt lobster and hunting crabs, walking, he called his friend Roger Horrocks, who is our main underwater cinematographer, who lives just a little bit down the road. And Roger started coming to film with him. And they spent hours together underwater and managed to capture some really incredible things. And in those scenes, there were actually 2 cameras, which was a dream from an editing point of view. When I came on board, what we didn't have, although Craig had managed to self-film some things with him and the octopus, and Roger had managed to grab some shots, we didn't have any shots of Craig swimming along the surface or diving down, or we didn't have those big, beautiful, wide underwater kelp forest shots. So there was a lot of material that we had to shoot still to provide context to the octopus story.
No, this is going to sound really a dumb question, but you know, there is so much equipment today. Why is it important for Craig, but for someone like you also, to go down without oxygen tanks? You know, to just have the experience of holding your breath and then having to come up for air. You know, it's a shallow water, but you're still in there for a long time and it's cold. Why it's important?
It's a couple of things. I mean, the first thing is you want to be as unobtrusive when you're filming animals as possible. And especially if you want to get close to a small animal like an octopus, and a lot of marine animals really don't like the bubbles that come out of a scuba tank. So then your alternative option is to use something like a rebreather, which recycles air and doesn't make bubbles, but it's a really, really heavy piece of equipment. You can't carry it on your own. And of course, the magic and the power of the footage that we had and the story that we had was the fact that Craig had gone in every single day. And in order to go in every single day, you need to be very agile. And that's why filming with no scuba equipment, filming without wetsuits, really just having the minimum amount of equipment is just really the most practical way of making a film like this.
This is no normal, and I think it's part of it, its beauty. It's not like a normal nature, you know, marine, you know, documentary, and its specialness is very much tied to the fact that it's told to the point of view, to Craig's you know, point of view. How did you find this solution? I don't think, I suggest, you know, I imagine it was not an easy process to get there and bring in through his emotional life and what he's going through.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned from this process as well came through this. So at the beginning of the process, when I first started working with Craig, bear in mind, I already knew him fairly well at that point, but we tried to do a few interviews and they just didn't work that well. I mean, we even considered interviewing his wife, his son, kind of octopus experts. We thought about many, many different ways of telling the story. And we did some of those interviews. We interviewed Roger, but we figured out very quickly that the most powerful voice would be Craig's voice, because most of the time spent underwater was just him and the animal. And there's something very liberating about having that subjective approach. But by the time I kind of started sitting him down to do these interviews, I'd already heard the story over and over again. He and I knew each other very well, and I wasn't getting answers that were kind of translating into good storytelling. So we tried a narration approach. We had a script, and Craig read the script, and he was still telling the story from his point of view, but there was a, you know, and probably because he's not an actor, but there was, it wasn't translating the way that we wanted it to. It wasn't coming across with that kind of spontaneity and authenticity that you see in the final film. And that's when we were very lucky that our executive producer, Ellen Windermith, got hold of James Reed. And James is a super experienced and talented natural history filmmaker, but his films are also slightly different in that he uses this interview-driven approach. And he saw our rough cut and he loved it. And then he flew out to South Africa, and him and I worked together a lot, and then sat Craig down for 3 days. And he told that story to James almost as if he was telling it for the very first time. And that, I think, is what audiences are seeing.
There is a question there.
Crazy question.
It's coming. The mic is coming.
Oh, okay, thank you. What kind of food did Craig eat on a daily basis?
What kind of food does Craig eat?
Food. How did
Um,
he sustain himself every day?
I think it's the question relates to is relationship with the water and being in for so long. What is this? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Craig he eats a fair amount of protein. He eats eggs in the morning. He's very healthy. He's very careful about only eating organic food. But I think you do need a lot of energy to deal with the cold. I experienced the same thing, especially when you start and your body's still adapting. So for the first 3 months, I remember I was just absolutely starving all the time, and I lost a lot of weight. But what happens is your body starts creating these little pockets of brown fat, it's called brown adipose tissue, and it's little pockets of tissue that form along your spine, and these things act as internal heaters. And all human beings are born with a lot of brown fat. All babies have a lot of it, but because we're not exposed to the cold as we grow up, we lose it. So the cold water, like basically you regrow that very special tissue. And then you can stay in the cold water, and it's not that difficult. Yeah.
What was the word? Brown fat? I'm sorry, brown fat?
Yes, brown fat. Yeah.
Brown adipose tissue. Yeah.
Brown, like my hair. Okay.
There is another question there.
Well, this is the second time I've seen this, first time in the theater. And this brought tears.
Yeah.
Again. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful film. So thank you. And then just because I'm a filmmaker, I just have a question. Those chase scenes in the water, how were they followed at such speed? The shark.
Let me if you didn't hear it, let me just yeah. So she said it's the second time she sees the film, and it brought her tears back to her eyes. So she thanks you for that. And as a filmmaker, her question is the chase scenes. How did you follow so quickly? The shark and the octopus. I mean, how could you stay with them so fast?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't on those shoots. Obviously, that stuff had all been captured by the time I got involved. But from Craig and Roger were down there together for days and days and days and days and days. I think they were in the water for about 90 days together of the 300 that you see in the film, and just capturing everything that they could. Sometimes they were in the water for 3 or 4 hours at a time. And the amazing thing about those chase scenes is, yes, Craig is having to go up and down the whole time, but Roger was on the bottom with a rebreather. So he managed to capture a lot. And of course, because you've got 2 cameras, that's how we managed to capture so much that, Roger was on one thing and Craig was on something else. And then we were able to put the whole story together.
You said before tracking. Can you explain to us what is how did you track the octopus? What does it mean, and how did you track it from day to day, or from
So tracking is a pretty fascinating thing. Tracking is really about learning the language of nature, and it's something that human beings have been doing since our very, very first days on Earth, probably since before we were even humans. And Craig learned about tracking during his time in the Kalahari from the San Bushmen, who are the oldest trackers on Earth. And they are able to move forwards and backwards in time by looking at, how and where an insect's track can be found, the way a branch has been moving in the wind, very, very subtle things. And Craig took those same principles and started applying them to the marine world. And it's pretty interesting with an octopus. You don't look for the animal itself if you want to track an octopus. You look for the animals. I call it the animal's trash. So, octopuses go out and they collect things that they want to eat, and they'll come home and they'll carry many, many things under their hood, climb into their den, and then once they're finished eating, they start tossing things out. So if you see like a whole lot of shells scattered around, you can swim down and pick one up and look for a hole. And if you see the octopus drill hole, then you can be fairly certain that the animal is within like a 1 or 2 meter radius.
I think I have another question, and then we probably need to wrap this because we were a little late and we have another show. But the question is, and it's really, and I think it's at the heart of the film, and what makes it so unique is you had to interpret the octopus decisions, his moves, his things, you know. And I think I wrote that you even used a scientist, someone that was an expert of octopus psychology. So how did you project? How did you find that out, or write that without being invasive, without being you know, making it anthropomorphic and condescending? I mean, how do you penetrate an octopus mind?
I mean, I think you can only do your best, because it's a very difficult thing to avoid anthropomorphism. But we thought it was important to try and get into the animal's mind, and in all the kind of practical ways that we could. So we contacted Professor Jennifer Mather, and she flew to South Africa, and she's been studying this her whole life, trying to understand what makes an octopus and why they are the way that they are. And you know, there are a few things that you can understand from their physicality that gives you insight into how their brains work. For example, an octopus is a snail. You know, they used to have a shell, but at some point they traded their shell for this incredibly big brain. And why did they do that? Well, the first thing she said to us is an octopus's whole life is defined by the tension between curiosity on one side and fear on the other side. And that's how they're thinking. So they want to explore things, but they're also cautious. And that's why it took her, the octopus, such a long time to learn to trust Craig. You know, they learn very, very quickly, because they only live for a year and a half, and they have to carry out their entire life cycle in that time. Their brains are developing extremely quickly. And they, you know, they have to learn where to drill in that shell, you know, within a couple of tries. And yeah, there are all sorts of clues that tell you how they're thinking. Sometimes we'll find a shell and there'll be like 3 or 4 different drill holes in it. So we know, okay, this was a young octopus that wasn't quite sure what it was doing, and it had to have 4 goes before it figured out how to get in here.
Well, Pippa, I have to, unfortunately, I really have to stop this because of the next showing that we, you know, the preview started late, but it's so great to have you, and congratulations for the film, and you really gifted us with your presence, and thanks again, and good luck on Sunday night.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.